My name is Diane. 74 years behind me, none of them particularly glamorous, but most of them honest. I live alone in the same split level house where I raised my son, Robert. The house has aged with me. The wallpaper is curling at the edges, and the kitchen tiles are cracked, but it's warm in the winter and mercifully cool in the summer, and I can always find everything by touch in the dark. The rooms echo more than they used to, but they're full of traces. Afternoon sunlight catching dust in the living room, the faint smell of old furniture polish, the stubborn rattle in the back hallway. Sometimes, if I stand very still, I can almost hear the old noises of life. A slammed door, laughter running upstairs, a radio drifting from a bedroom. But mostly it's quiet, a gentle, dignified quiet. In the evenings, I have my rituals. After supper, usually something plain, like chicken and rice or a bowl of soup, I set my plate in the sink, wipe down the counter, and draw the curtains. Then I carry my laptop from the kitchen table to the couch in the living room, setting it on the floral cushion I use as a tray. It was Robert who set up the streaming account for me. He and his wife, Karen, had come for dinner that spring. He'd brought a little gadget, some wires, and spent 20 minutes trying to connect the laptop to my old TV before finally giving up and setting it up right there on the computer. "I made you your own profile, Mom," he'd said, typing in my name with the deliberate care of a child making a birthday card. "The password is your birthday, 2430. He showed me how to scroll through the shows, how to pick one, how to make the volume louder or softer. He even set my favorite channel, one with old Julia Child reruns and black and white movies, at the very top. "Now you won't have to wait for reruns," he said, proud, as if this small act would bridge the distance between us, or between me and the world. After they left that night, I made tea and watched an episode of The French Chef. Julia Child's voice always made me feel less alone. I fell asleep halfway through, the mug cooling in my hands, and when I woke with a stiff neck and a start, I found myself smiling, the house not quite so silent. That became my habit. My evenings drifted into a soft, gentle routine. Some nights, I'd pick an old Cary Grant film. Other nights, a cooking show, the kind where cheerful women with aprons putter around spotless kitchens. Occasionally, Molly, my granddaughter, would send me a message, usually a meme or a link to something funny, and I'd watch it on the laptop, then scroll back to my familiar shows. Sometimes I dozed off before the ending. More often than not, actually. I'd wake around midnight, the light from the screen painting blue shadows on the far wall, a gentle ache in my knees. But falling asleep to the flicker of an old movie was different than falling asleep in a chair. It felt like someone was still there with me, even if it was just a voice on a screen. And somehow, waking up to the gentle hum of a show, even one I'd seen a dozen times, made the house feel less empty, as if, for a little while, somebody still needed me. That's how I would have told it if anyone asked. No, I don't mind being alone. I have my routines, my old movies, my favorite recipes. But I liked having a space, however small, on something my family used. I liked knowing Robert had made that space for me, and in the evenings, when the house was full of the soft light of the laptop and the sound of familiar voices, I didn't feel quite so forgotten. It was a Thursday evening in early autumn when it happened. The day had been unremarkable. I walked to the corner store in the morning for eggs and a carton of milk, waved hello to Mrs. Farnsworth tending her garden, stopped by the library to return a stack of mysteries. In the afternoon, I read by the window, then called Molly. She didn't pick up, but I left a voicemail. "Just checking in. Love you." I made chicken salad for dinner and listened to the clock tick. At 7:30, I tidied the kitchen and filled the kettle. It had become a private pleasure, setting up my little station on the couch, laptop balanced, a mug of tea on a coaster, a soft blanket tucked around my feet. I'd been looking forward to the finale of a British mystery series I'd followed for months. Nothing urgent, but these small pleasures shaped the days at my age. I sat, opened the laptop, and typed in my birthday. The login screen blinked, then an error message popped up. I frowned and tried again. Another error, incorrect password. I checked the sticky note where I'd written the details, just in case. 2430. The same. I tried one more time. Still nothing. I waited, staring at the screen. For a moment, I wondered if I'd forgotten how, if my hands had somehow typed wrong. My fingers hovered, uncertain. I closed the browser, opened it again. The same message, account locked. A discomfort bloomed low in my stomach. Not anger, something smaller, pricklier. Embarrassment, maybe. I didn't want to bother Robert, but it was his account. I picked up my phone and typed a message. Hi, love. The TV isn't letting me in tonight. Is something wrong with the password? I set the phone on the coffee table and sat back, hands folded in my lap, waiting. A full minute passed. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, so I rose and poured my tea, deliberately slow, buying time. I added milk, a sugar cube, a dash of cinnamon. I returned to the couch, tea in hand, and checked my phone. A reply had come through. I opened it, expecting reassurance, maybe a new password, maybe a silly mistake. But it was short, blunt, without punctuation. Mom, you fall asleep in front of the TV anyway. We removed your profile because we didn't have enough slots. For a moment, the room felt colder. I read it again, wondering if I'd misunderstood. No apology, no question, just a statement, a quiet, unceremonious removal. My first instinct was to make a joke, to pretend I didn't mind, to minimize my own disappointment, as I've done 1,000 times since Robert grew up and started his own life. But there was no point, really. The decision had already been made, and the world didn't stop spinning because of it. I typed back, got it. Thanks for letting me know. I didn't add anything else. Not, I understand, not, don't worry about it. Just those 3 words, as even and light as I could make them. I put my phone down, quietly, and sat with my tea cooling in my hands. The house was silent except for the soft humming of the refrigerator, the distant passing of a car outside. There was no anger, not really. The emotion was gentler, deeper, a hollowed-out ache I'd felt before, when Robert first moved away, or when I caught myself setting an extra plate at the table out of old habit. The decision, I realized, had been made not out of cruelty, but convenience. I'd been removed because someone else needed the space. My presence, my profile, my habits, none of them had been considered essential, not even for nostalgia. A small part of me wanted to cry, but it felt too self-indulgent. Instead, I stood up, set my tea aside, and moved to the hallway closet. The doors creaked on their hinges as I pulled them open, the scent of old wood and dust rising in the air. It had been years since I'd really gone through it. Most of the things inside were relics from another life, out-of-season coats, a box of Christmas ornaments, bags of old wrapping paper. On the top shelf sat a battered cardboard box, heavier than I remembered. I pulled it down and carried it to the dining room table. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of memory. Inside were tapes, VHS, some DVDs, old cassette recordings, even a few reels of film from the 60s. Home movies, most labeled in my handwriting. Robert's 8th birthday, 1984. Christmas at Grandma's, 1992. Karen's wedding shower. Family trip to the lake, 1978. There were others, too. Television programs I'd taped to watch later. Cooking shows, concerts, interviews. My life and my family's, trapped in a nest of magnetic tape and plastic, dusted with years. For a moment, I sat perfectly still, the boxes arrayed around me, the silence pressing in. The sting in my chest eased, not gone, but replaced by something different. Resolve, maybe, or simply the need to remember that I still existed, even if it was only here, among the forgotten things. I spent the rest of the evening sorting through the boxes, reading the faded labels, tracing the years with my fingertips, not to fall asleep this time, but to remember who I was. The box sat on the dining room table long after the sky had faded to indigo, and the house was swallowed by its own hush. I didn't bother turning on all the lights, just the lamp above the table, casting a small pool of gold over the old cardboard, the tapes, the years. I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose and eased the first tape out, careful with the brittle plastic. There was a layer of dust on everything, evidence of years untouched. I brushed it off with the sleeve of my cardigan and squinted at the label. Robert, School Play, 1986. It felt almost like handling artifacts in a museum, except these belonged to me, to us. I looked around for the small portable player, the one Charles bought when VHS first became popular. It was still there on the lower shelf of the credenza, wedged behind a stack of outdated cookbooks and a box of sewing notions. It took some wrangling, tangling and untangling cords, searching for an outlet that wasn't already full of other things I never used. I plugged it in, fed in the tape, and listened to the familiar mechanical click and whir as it loaded. The TV, the old one, fat and glassy, with a faint greenish tinge at the corners, flickered awake with a low hum. The picture wobbled, then steadied. For a few seconds, just static, then a blurred gymnasium, the faint sound of children's voices, and there, tiny, nervous, in a badly fitting lamb costume, Robert, about 8 years old, scanning the crowd for me. I sat back, my hands folded in my lap, watching the past unfold. There were other parents' voices off camera, the crinkling of candy wrappers, the unsteady zooms and pans of a mother, too caught up in the moment to frame the shot perfectly. I could hear myself behind the camera, prompting him to wave, and then laughing, my own voice years younger and lighter. It was all there, unvarnished, unedited, real. I watched the whole thing, the play, the awkward bows, the running off stage at the end. I let it play until the tape ended, then rewound, the whirring familiar as a heartbeat. I went through the tapes one by one, working slowly, sometimes stopping to wipe dust from the covers, sometimes scribbling fresh labels with a fading black marker. Lake House Summer, 1981. Easter Egg Hunt, 1995. Each one pulled something from the fog of memory. Robert with gap-toothed grins, Karen laughing in the garden, my mother's voice calling out from the edge of the frame. There were quiet bits, too. Me, alone in the kitchen, demonstrating how to make scones, not knowing anyone would ever watch. I'd forgotten how much I used to record. Not for posterity, but for company. Even then, maybe I sensed how time would shrink, how the rooms would empty. The hours passed. I made another cup of tea, this time letting the bag steep until it turned strong and dark, then added more milk than usual. The house felt different, alive in its stillness, full of invisible voices and half-remembered scents. Lemon polish, cocoa powder, the sweet, sharp smell of crayons. With each tape, I found myself quietly narrating as if someone was beside me, as if someone cared about the details. That's the summer Molly broke her arm. Oh, that's when the cat had kittens under the porch. That's the Christmas Robert refused to wear his new sweater. I realized somewhere around midnight that I wasn't sleepy at all. There was a quiet energy inside me, a feeling that I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose, the need to make sense of things, to label, to curate, to claim what was mine. When my hands began to ache from the sorting, I took out a small notepad and started a list. Which tapes still played? Which ones needed new cases? Which had nothing to do with family, but everything to do with me? Old recipe programs, interviews with authors, even a few news broadcasts I'd saved for reasons now lost. It struck me that so much of what I'd kept was about being seen, about leaving a mark, even if only on tape. Who had I been when I wasn't just mom? Who was I when I wasn't filling a slot or taking up space? I worked until nearly 2, the house dark and quiet except for the blue flicker of the TV, the soft hiss of tapes rewinding, the shuffle of papers as I organized and made notes. At last, my eyelids grew heavy. I stacked the tapes neatly on the table, covered them with a tea towel, and unplugged the old player. I looked around the silent house, the living room faintly glowing, the boxes labeled with years and names and seasons. Tonight, I wouldn't fall asleep in front of a show that wasn't mine. Tonight, I fell asleep knowing I was more than a profile. I was a story full of dust and film and memory, and that story, for the first time in years, felt like it belonged to me. The morning after my night with the tapes, I woke up with a different sort of ache, a mixture of stiff muscles and something sharper, more restless. I shuffled to the kitchen, set the kettle to boil, and leaned on the counter, staring out at the gray, quiet street. The box of tapes was still on the table, a presence that refused to fade into the background. I made a strong cup of tea, sat down in my old sweater, and began making a list on the back of an envelope. Not groceries, not chores, a plan. What did I want to do with all these tapes? Was I just preserving them for myself? Or, after so many years of being quietly erased, did I want to be seen again? A stubborn spark, part pride, part defiance, grew inside me. I remembered the sharpness in Robert's text. We removed your profile because we didn't have enough slots. I thought of all those moments I'd recorded, sometimes for the family, but often just for the comfort of my own voice echoing back at me. I didn't want to fade away in someone else's margins. If I was going to be cut out of the shared spaces, I'd find a way to make a space that belonged only to me. That week, I spent hours online, reading articles about converting VHS to digital files. The first hurdle was the hardware. My old player was nearly obsolete, but there were devices now, small and clever, that could connect an ancient VCR to a computer. I ordered one online, even paid extra for express shipping, feeling oddly giddy at the recklessness. At the same time, I read about video editing. Not the complicated stuff, not the movie trailers with jump cuts and explosions, but the simple art of trimming a clip, adding a title, maybe a bit of music at the start. I watched tutorials, young people with soft voices, explaining patiently how to use programs with names like OpenShot and iMovie. I took notes in a spiral notebook left over from my teaching days. The converter arrived a few days later in a neat brown box, along with a printed quick start guide in type, so tiny I had to fetch my magnifying glass. Still, I was determined. The first tape I digitized was Christmas at Grandma's, 1992. It took nearly the whole afternoon, my laptop whirring, the VCR clicking, my heart thudding with a mix of anxiety and pride every time the software told me success. That night, I watched the finished file on my computer, the images clearer than I'd remembered, the sound warm and real. There was Robert, small and delighted, unwrapping a model train. There was Karen, shy and glowing in a new sweater. There was me, off to one side, laughing. My laugh, my face, younger and softer. My voice rising in a way that was utterly mine. Something shifted then. What if these weren't just for me? What if I could share them, not just with the family, but with anyone who cared to see? The idea was almost frightening, but also thrilling. The next morning, after a night of restless excitement, I took the plunge. I opened a new tab and typed, "How to start a YouTube channel." The guides were straightforward, if a bit chirpy. "Choose your channel name," one banner declared, as if it was as simple as picking a flavor of jam. I wrote down ideas. Diane's kitchen table, family films. None of them felt quite right. Then I remembered the years I spent filming not just holidays, but recipe demonstrations. How I used to bake bread with Molly perched on a stool, or record my hands rolling out pastry for a neighbor's birthday. It came to me all at once. Memory Kitchen. A place for memories, a place for food, a place for voices that might have faded but still had something to say. With trembling fingers, I created the account. I chose an old photo for the icon. Me at the age of 40, flour on my nose, arms elbow deep in bread dough. I filled in the description. Home videos, recipes, stories from a life spent at the kitchen table. Welcome to my memory kitchen. Uploading was slower than I'd imagined. My internet groaned under the weight of even one short video. But I was patient. I started with a 5-minute clip of Robert's school play, trimmed to include just his part and the sound of my voice cheering. Then a holiday dinner. Then a recipe for apple pie, filmed in my kitchen with Molly giggling in the background. I even included the outtakes, the bits where I dropped a spoon or laughed at the cat jumping onto the table. I remembered my daughter's wedding video, how she once called it a shameful recording, too full of nervous speeches and unpolished moments. I watched it again, this time with kinder eyes. It was imperfect, yes, but it was real and honest and full of the awkward, lovely hope of family. I uploaded that too. As the days went on, I learned to edit the videos, to add titles, to write gentle captions in the description box. I made a playlist for recipes, another for family moments, another for little life tips that I remembered from my own mother and grandmother. The kitchen table became my studio, papers and cords everywhere, old tapes lined up beside the salt and pepper shakers, the laptop humming with purpose. For the first time in years, I felt busy, not just with tasks, but with the business of being myself. One evening, I watched the first 3 videos go live. There were no views at first, but I waited, content in the simple act of creating. I didn't fall asleep in front of someone else's story. I sat up, watching the numbers tick from 0 to 1, then to 2, then to 4, each one a small, private triumph. For years, I had been a quiet presence in other people's lives, helpful, convenient, and easily edited out when there was no more room. Now, for the first time, I was making a space that belonged only to me. And as I closed the laptop and gazed around my cluttered golden kitchen, I realized I wasn't just remembering who I had been. I was becoming someone new. The first week of Memory Kitchen was a lesson in patience and humility. The numbers climbed slowly. 2 views, then 7, then 12. I clicked refresh more often than I'd like to admit. At first, it felt like tossing messages in bottles into a silent, indifferent sea. But even before the comments, before any acknowledgement, there was a strange satisfaction, like sweeping the porch before sunrise, knowing someone might appreciate the gesture, even if you never saw them do it. I kept uploading. Every morning after breakfast, I'd digitize a new tape, trim a video, and fuss over details. Should I keep my laughter in the audio, even if it cracked embarrassingly? Was it better to write formal captions or just say, "Here's how I always made scones. Don't be afraid to get your hands messy"? I erred on the side of honesty, letting the videos be imperfect, human. It wasn't long before I saw my first real comment. It was on the apple pie recipe, the one Molly helped me film when she was 10, her hands dusted with flour, mine steady on hers as we pinched the crust. "Thank you. It's like being home again. I lost my grandma last year. This brought her back for a little while." I read it twice, then again. The words swelled in my chest. Simple, earnest, a gratitude that was somehow both anonymous and profoundly intimate. I wrote back, slowly, carefully. I'm so glad it meant something to you. Baking with my granddaughter is still one of my favorite memories. After that, a trickle of comments appeared beneath the videos. This is my mother's recipe exactly. I haven't heard this kind of kitchen story in years. Thank you for sharing. You're like my grandma's voice. Some people asked questions about pie crust, about family dinners, about how to rescue a soup that's turned too salty. Others just left a heart emoji, or a thank you, or a story of their own. Each message I answered with care, using my own voice, not something borrowed or smoothed out. Sometimes I recorded audio replies, a feature Molly had shown me years ago, thinking I'd never use it. Now, with my hands trembling slightly, I found it easier than typing, easier than risking the wrong word. It was an odd sensation, speaking into the computer, at first self-conscious, then oddly freeing. I talked about baking bread, about the trick of folding in egg whites, about how the kitchen in the old house had terrible lighting and a drafty window that let in the smell of lilacs every spring. I shared the stories I'd always told my family, only now they weren't rolling their eyes or checking their phones. They were listening and responding. The channel began to grow, slowly, quietly. A subscriber here, another there. I recognized some of the usernames as people from cooking forums or local community groups. Some, I realized with surprise, were complete strangers, people from other towns, other countries, people who just wanted to remember or to feel remembered. One morning, an email arrived with the subject line, Collaboration Opportunity. It was from a woman in Nova Scotia who ran her own small channel about traditional Canadian recipes. I found your apple pie video, and it reminded me of my mother. Would you ever consider making a video together? Maybe a dueling pies episode? I laughed aloud, imagining myself in a duel at my age. Still, I wrote back, enthusiastic, a little nervous, but willing. The collaboration was simple. We each filmed ourselves making our favorite family pie, shared stories about kitchen disasters and secret ingredients, and stitched the videos together with some patient help from my new friend. I told the story of the first time Robert tried to bake alone, mistaking salt for sugar. I showed how Molly always stole a spoonful of filling, leaving her fingers sticky and her face shining with guilt. At the end, we each raised a slice to the camera, to all the grandmas who ever dusted a kitchen with flour and laughter. That video was my first to cross 100 views, then 200. The comments multiplied, strangers telling me I reminded them of home, asking for tips on making crust, sharing photos of their own attempts. Late one evening, I checked my messages and found a voice note from a young woman named Emily. I just wanted to say, I found your channel while I was feeling homesick. Your voice is so calming. I made your scones today and called my mom just to tell her. Thank you for reminding me that it's okay to miss someone and to try anyway. I listened to it twice, then sent a reply, my own voice, warm and unhurried, thanking her, offering a few words about how baking is sometimes just a way of making memory you can eat. The kitchen, once a place of routines and old habits, felt suddenly larger, full of invisible company. I started leaving my phone propped up as I cooked, recording tips, little memories, laughter at my own mistakes. I found myself singing while I kneaded dough, narrating each step out loud, not for an audience, but for the joy of being heard. One night, scrolling through comments with a cup of tea, I found this. Thank you, Diane. This is delicious and honest. I sat back and let the words settle over me. For so long, my voice had been background noise in someone else's living room, a profile to be added or removed as needed. Now, my voice was traveling farther than I ever had, touching people I'd never meet, bringing something gentle and real into the world. I was not filling a slot. I was being heard. It was nearly 2 months after I posted my first video when the past, so carefully boxed up and remade, circled back around to find me. The days had grown short. Autumn leaves skittered along the sidewalk, piling up in orange drifts by the garden wall. My kitchen was always filled with the golden light of late afternoon. That's where I was, rolling out dough for a batch of cinnamon rolls, when my phone chimed insistently. I wiped my hands, picked it up, and saw a new message in the old family group chat, the one that mostly sat silent except for holiday plans. It was a link sent by Molly with just 3 words: "Grandma, is this you?" Above her message was a still frame, me on camera, flour on my cheek, hands in dough, talking about the tricks to keep a roll soft for days. My heart squeezed. For a moment, I thought about deleting the channel. I wondered how she'd found it. Had someone at school shared it? Did she stumble across it on accident? Or did she go looking for me out of curiosity, or nostalgia, or something I couldn't guess at? Before I could reply, another message popped up, this time from Robert. "Mom, what's all this? How long have you been making these videos?" I set my phone down on the table, feeling a strange mix of pride and dread. For a few moments, I just listened to the dough squeak under my rolling pin, the gentle hum of the oven warming, the house alive with the smells of cinnamon and sugar. I thought back to the years when I would have dropped everything for a moment like this, when every word from my son or granddaughter felt like a lifeline. Now I realized I didn't have to hurry. My reply could wait until I'd finished the rolls, until I'd had my tea. That night I sat down at my laptop and typed out a calm, honest response. "Yes, it's me. I've been making videos from the old family tapes and some new recipes. It's my project now. I'm sharing things I remember and things I've learned with people who want to listen. Love, Mom." The reply came quickly from Molly. "Grandma, you're famous. My friends have all watched your pie video. Where did you keep all this stuff? Why didn't you ever show us before?" I read her message a few times. There was excitement, even wonder, but underneath it, a hint of accusation. As if the treasures I'd kept tucked away, the pieces of family they'd left in my care, should have been brought out sooner. I smiled, a little sad, a little proud, and typed back, "Where I haven't been deleted." That was all I said. I didn't explain further, didn't apologize, didn't offer more than the truth she'd asked for. For a long time, the chat stayed silent. No more questions, no more jokes. I wondered if Robert or Karen would write again, if they would want to know more, if they would understand what it felt like to hold a story nobody wanted until they saw it was gone. The next afternoon, the phone rang. It was Robert. His voice was uncertain, a little tight. "Mom, I watched some of those videos. Karen did too. They're nice. There's a lot of family stuff there. Are you sure you want it all online?" "Mom, I watched some of those videos. Karen did too. They're nice. There's a lot of family stuff there. Are you sure you want it all online?" I heard the worry underneath. Was it privacy or embarrassment, or just surprise that I had a life he didn't fully see? I answered simply, yes. These memories aren't just for us. Sometimes I think they belong to the people who need them most, people who remember or want to remember. He was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear him sorting through all the years I'd been a fixture in his life. His mom, his helper, his fallback, now suddenly separate and whole. "Well, if you ever want help editing, let me know," he said finally. "Molly says you're kind of a hit at her school." That made me laugh. The tension eased. "Thank you, dear, but I think I'm doing just fine." We didn't talk about the streaming account or the message that started it all. There was no apology, no tidy closure, but something had shifted, a new, wary respect. Or maybe just the acceptance that the past had its own power, and I was entitled to mine. Later that week, Karen sent a short note by email. I watched the wedding video. It wasn't as bad as I remembered. Thanks for saving it. I replied with a simple, "You're welcome. I'm glad you could see it now." From then on, I felt the family watching from a distance. They didn't crowd in, didn't try to claim the project as theirs. The group chat stayed quiet. But sometimes I saw a new subscriber with a familiar last name or a comment that made me smile. A cousin, an old friend, someone who remembered the same events in a slightly different way. My world had grown larger. I had a place where I couldn't be erased. And as I uploaded the next video, a holiday recipe, told in the quiet, loving way my mother once taught me, I realized that the space I'd created was more than just digital. It was mine, it was visible, and, quietly, it was enough. Winter set in early that year, the kind of season that wraps the house in a hush of snow and insists on slow, deliberate living. My kitchen windows wore patterns of frost each morning, and the world beyond them shrank to a soft, silvery glow. It was a time for thick sweaters, the slow bubbling of soup on the stove, and long afternoons spent by the light of my laptop. But something inside me had shifted. The loneliness that once pressed in so heavily had given way to a sense of gentle fullness. My days were no less quiet, but the silence had changed. It was now filled with purpose, with memory, with a strange, persistent hope. I no longer reached for the laptop simply to fill the void with other people's voices. The streaming account and the profile that once felt like a lifeline faded into irrelevance. Instead, my evenings became an extension of my kitchen and my stories. I'd sit with a notebook at my elbow, jotting down recipes I'd remembered after years of neglect, or the small moments that surfaced as I watched my old tapes, the sound of rain on a summer cabin roof, Robert's triumphant face at the county fair, Molly's crooked birthday candles, and then there was the community, strangers, friends, and a slow trickle of family who filled the comments section of Memory Kitchen with a warmth I hadn't expected. They sent photos of lopsided pies, recounted kitchen mishaps, sometimes just wrote, "I needed this tonight." There were people in cities I'd never visited, people halfway around the world who tried my recipes and called them comfort. One night, I watched a video from a woman in Canada. She and her daughter were making my lemon bars, laughing as the powdered sugar flew everywhere. In the comments, she wrote, "Thanks, Diane. This is delicious and honest." I watched that clip twice, then a third time, letting the words settle into the empty spaces inside me. I realized, not for the first time, that I had become part of other people's evenings, their rituals, their quiet search for home. The sense of being deleted, of quietly excised from the shared spaces of my family, no longer stung the way it once had. I saw it now for what it was, not malice, not even neglect, but the inevitable fading that happens when lives drift apart. I was not erased, not truly. I was simply relocated, pressed into the background for a while, waiting for the right moment to reappear. And now, every box I unpacked, every tape I digitized, every recipe I shared, made me visible again. Not as someone's placeholder, but as myself. Sometimes, in the quiet hour before bed, I would walk past the living room and see the TV sitting dark, the couch inviting but empty. I felt no urge to fill that space with borrowed stories. I would brew a small pot of tea and sit by the window, laptop open to a message or two from viewers who called me Miss Diane or Mama D. Some nights I'd send a voice reply, my accent softened with age, my words slow and sure. There were moments, too, when the ache of old wounds returned. A memory of Robert's message, abrupt and transactional, or the years I spent making myself smaller to fit someone else's needs. But those feelings faded quickly, replaced by the soft glow of new connections and the pride of having built something all my own. Once I saw a new comment from Molly. Grandma, can I come over and make those rolls with you? I want to record it for my friends. I replied, Of course. There's always room in my kitchen. And so she came, with her phone and her easy laugh, and together we filmed ourselves making cinnamon rolls, her hands echoing the movements she'd learned as a child. We talked about everything and nothing, and when the video was done, she hugged me tightly. I didn't know you remembered all of this, she whispered. I smiled. I never forgot. I was just waiting for you to want to remember too. The channel grew in fits and starts. Sometimes a video would go quiet. Sometimes it would be shared far beyond what I could imagine. My subscribers became pen pals and companions, the kind of audience that shows up not out of duty, but out of genuine interest. I received letters, real letters, some in careful handwriting, some typed and signed, telling me about grandmothers long gone, about kitchens filled with laughter, about the small, sustaining comfort of seeing a familiar face through a glowing screen. I saved everyone in a wooden box by the kitchen window. I was not famous, not in any sense that mattered outside this new circle, but I was needed, not as a placeholder, but as a keeper of memory, a quiet presence that, for once, could not be deleted. And so, while my family settled into their new routines, while Robert and Karen managed their own lives and the TV held one less profile, I kept cooking, filming, sharing, and answering. I watched the seasons change from my window, the world growing quiet and then, in time, noisy again. I grew older, but not invisible. In the end, I realized it was never about having a slot on a screen or a place in someone else's living room. It was about seeing myself and letting myself be seen, exactly as I was, dust, film, flour, laughter, and all. The kitchen light glowed long into the evening. Somewhere, someone pressed play, and my voice, warm, a little raspy, completely my own, carried into another home, another heart, just as honest and needed as ever. And I was never, ever deleted again.